empath walks into a room and senses what others have spent a lifetime trying to hide, not because they are intrusive, not because they are superior, but because their nervous system learned, often very early in life, to read the emotional weather around them. What began as a survival adaptation becomes, later in life, a rare gift. But here is the paradox: the very quality that makes the empath loving, intuitive, and compassionate can also make them a target of envy. Envy does not arise in the presence of weakness. It arises in the presence of something powerful. When someone pretends to love you but secretly resents you, what they often resent is not your kindness, it is your wholeness, your ability to feel deeply, your capacity for reflection, your willingness to grow. To a person who has built their identity on emotional suppression, your authenticity feels threatening, because authenticity is a mirror, and mirrors do not lie. An empath reflects back what is unhealed in others, not intentionally, not maliciously, simply by being present. If someone carries unprocessed shame, your compassion exposes their self-rejection. If someone is disconnected from their inner world, your emotional fluency highlights their numbness, and instead of turning inward to heal, they may turn outward to attack, subtly. Envy often disguises itself as criticism. You are too sensitive. You care too much. You overthink. But what is sensitivity except awareness? What is caring except connection? What is reflection except consciousness? When people lack these capacities within themselves, they may first admire them in you, but admiration without self-work easily becomes resentment, because to truly admire someone requires the courage to ask, why have I abandoned this part of myself? And that question is uncomfortable. Many people who pretend to love empaths are drawn to their warmth. They feel safe in their presence, seen, understood, regulated. The empath becomes unconsciously the emotional stabilizer in the relationship. But what happens when the empath begins to grow, when they begin setting boundaries, when they stop overfunctioning? The person who depended on their emotional labor may experience that shift as betrayal, not because it is betrayal, but because they never learned to stand on their own emotional feet. Here is something essential to understand. Envy is rooted in shame. When someone envies you, it is often because your existence highlights the gap between who they are and who they fear they could never become. Instead of confronting that pain, they may attempt to diminish you. Subtle put-downs, withdrawal of affection, passive aggression, all strategies to reduce the discomfort of comparison. The empath, conditioned to maintain harmony, may internalize this behavior. They may work harder, love more, apologize for their needs, shrink their light. This is the tragedy of self-abandonment. The empath who learned early in life that love must be earned will often tolerate resentment disguised as intimacy. They will sense the tension but blame themselves for it. They will try to heal what they did not want. But awareness changes everything. When an empath recognizes that envy is not evidence of their inadequacy but a reflection of another as unresolved pain, something shifts internally. They stop personalizing the hostility. They begin observing instead of absorbing. And with observation comes choice. You can have compassion for someone else's wounds without sacrificing your nervous system. You can understand their envy without collapsing into guilt. You can love without overextending. True compassion includes yourself. The deepest transformation for an empath is not becoming less sensitive. It is becoming less self-abandoning. It is recognizing that your empathy is not an invitation to be diminished. It is a strength that requires boundaries to remain healthy. When you stop shrinking to accommodate someone else, as insecurity, you may lose relationships built on imbalance. But you will gain something far more valuable, integrity. And integrity is peace. Those who are ready to grow will meet you there. Those who are not may continue to resent what you represent. That is not your burden to carry. You were never meant to dim your awareness to make others comfortable. You were meant to embody it responsibly, compassionately, and with self-respect. Envy cannot survive where there is accountability. Resentment cannot survive where there is self-reflection. But until others choose that path, their discomfort with your light is simply information. Let it inform you, not define you, because the work of healing is not about becoming smaller so others feel larger. It is about becoming fully yourself. And that is something no one can pretend to love without eventually being changed by it. Empathy is power, not weakness, lives in a culture that often misunderstands strength. From early childhood, many people are taught that toughness means suppression, that resilience means silence, that maturity means emotional distance. In such an environment, the empath grows up feeling different, sensitive, aware, attuned to subtleties others overlook. And because that attunement developed as a survival strategy, it becomes both a shield and a burden. Empathy begins in the nervous system. A child who must read the emotional climate of a parent learns quickly to scan tone, posture, breathing, silence. The body becomes an instrument of perception. What appears later as compassion was once vigilance. What looks like softness was once protection. To dismiss empathy as weakness is to misunderstand its origin. It was forged in adaptation. It required intelligence, courage, and immense inner flexibility. Power is not loud. It is not domination. It is not control. True power is the capacity to remain present in the face of intensity. An empath can sit with grief without fleeing, can sense anger without collapsing, can detect unspoken pain beneath harsh words. That requires strength of nervous system and depth of awareness. Many who call empathy weakness are in fact overwhelmed by feelings they never learned to regulate. There's a profound difference between fragility and sensitivity. Fragility shatters under pressure. Sensitivity absorbs information. An empath may feel deeply, but feeling deeply does not mean breaking easily. In many cases, it means integrating experiences more fully. It means recognizing complexity rather than reducing life to black and white. That complexity is not weakness, it is sophistication. Society often rewards emotional numbness because numbness appears efficient. Decisions made without reflection seem decisive. Boundaries enforced without explanation seem firm. Yet what is the cost of disconnection? Relationships become transactional. Communication becomes defensive. The absence of empathy may create temporary control, but it erodes trust. And without trust, there is no true leadership, no true intimacy, no true community. Empathy is relational power. It allows a person to understand motivations beneath behaviors, to see that criticism may conceal insecurity, that withdrawal may hide fear, that aggression may mask shame. When you understand this, you are no longer easily manipulated by surface reactions. You respond rather than react. You choose rather than explode. That capacity to choose is strength. However, empathy without boundaries turns into self-abandonment. Many empaths were conditioned to prioritize others, emotions over their own. They learned that harmony ensured safety, so they overextend, overgive, overexplain. In those moments, empathy feels exhausting. Not because empathy is weak, but because it is misdirected. Power requires containment. Fire warms when contained. It destroys when unbounded. To reclaim empathy's power, one must integrate self-awareness. Notice when compassion shifts into rescuing. Notice when understanding becomes justification for mistreatment. You can understand someone's trauma without tolerating their harm. You can acknowledge their pain without absorbing it into your own nervous system. This differentiation is maturity. There's also creative power in empathy. Artists, healers, teachers, leaders who move hearts do so because they feel. They sense what is unspoken in a room. They articulate experiences others struggle to name. That articulation creates connection. Connection reduces isolation. And isolation is one of the deepest human wounds. The empath bridges that gap. Consider the courage required to remain open in a world that rewards armor, to feel grief without numbing through distraction, to love without constant calculation, to apologize when wrong, to forgive without erasing accountability. These are not acts of weakness. They are acts of inner stability. Often those who dismiss empathy secretly long for it. They may envy the empath as emotional fluency. Envy arises not in the presence of deficiency, but in the presence of something valued yet undeveloped within oneself. Instead of cultivating their own depth, they may attempt to belittle yours. They may call you too sensitive because your awareness unsettles their avoidance. But the answer is not to harden. It is to strengthen wisely. Strengthen your capacity to say no. Strengthen your tolerance for others' disappointment. Strengthen your commitment to your own emotional truth. Empathy combined with self-respect becomes formidable. When you no longer equate kindness with compliance, something shifts. You realize that being understanding does not require being available at all times. You recognize that your nervous system deserves protection. You choose relationships where empathy flows both ways. Reciprocity transforms empathy from depletion into nourishment. The world does not suffer from too much empathy. It suffers from empathy that has been suppressed, distorted, or exploited. When empathy is integrated with boundaries, clarity, and accountability, it becomes transformative. Conflicts soften. Conversations deepen. Systems humanize. The deepest power of empathy lies in its capacity to heal intergenerational patterns. When one person chooses awareness over reaction, the chain of unconscious behavior weakens. A parent who listens instead of shames alters a child's nervous system. A partner who validates instead of dismisses reshapes attachment. These quiet shifts ripple outward. Empathy is not about absorbing everyone's pain. It is about recognizing shared humanity without losing oneself. It is about standing in your own center while acknowledging another as experience. That stance requires grounding, courage, and continuous self-reflection. So if you've been told you're too sensitive, question the premise. Sensitivity informed by awareness is perception. Perception guided by boundaries is wisdom. Wisdom expressed through compassion is strength. Empathy is power, is not dramatic. It does not seek applause. It moves quietly through conversations, through relationships, through communities, altering the emotional climate. It invites authenticity. It challenges pretense. It asks for responsibility. And when embodied fully, it becomes one of the most resilient forces a human being can carry within. Unresolved shame shapes perception in ways most people never consciously examine. It settles quietly into the nervous system, embedding itself as a felt sense of not enoughness, not good enough, not worthy enough, not lovable enough. Shame is not the belief that one has done something wrong, it is the deeper conviction that one is wrong. And when this conviction remains unexamined, it does not stay contained within the self. It distorts how we see others. Envy often grows from that distortion. Envy is rarely about wanting what another person has in a material sense. It is about the painful awareness of a gap between who we are and who we believe we should be. When someone embodies qualities we have disowned in ourselves, confidence, creativity, emotional fluency, authenticity, it can stir an old wound. Instead of inspiring growth, it may trigger resentment. That resentment becomes easier to tolerate than the raw ache of shame. Shame thrives in secrecy. Many individuals learned early in life that certain emotions were unacceptable. Anger might have been punished, sadness dismissed, joy minimized. Over time, the child adapts by disconnecting from authentic expression. This adaptation protects attachment, but fractures identity. The adult then walks through life with a subtle sense of incompleteness, unsure why certain people feel threatening. When someone stands comfortably in their own skin, unresolved shame reacts. The reaction may not be conscious. It may manifest as subtle criticism, comparison, gossip, or withdrawal. Envy becomes a defense against vulnerability. It says, if I diminish them, I do not have to confront what I lack. But what feels like lack is often disowned potential. The nervous system does not differentiate easily between past and present. When an individual with unresolved shame encounters someone who shines in an area they suppressed long ago, the body can respond as if it is being exposed. Exposure feels dangerous, especially if authenticity once led to rejection. Envy then acts as armor. It protects the fragile self-image built to survive. Consider how often admiration quietly transforms into irritation. At first there is appreciation. They are so confident. They are so compassionate. They are so talented. But if the observer does not believe those qualities are accessible within themselves, admiration turns inward as self-criticism. Self-criticism becomes discomfort. Discomfort seeks relief. Relief comes through devaluation. Unresolved shame narrows perspective. It convinces a person that another's success subtracts from their own worth. That love is scarce. That attention is limited. That validation must be competed for. This scarcity mindset fuels envy. Yet shame rarely allows the individual to articulate this openly. Instead, it leaks out through passive aggression or subtle undermining. Envy is painful because it reveals longing. Beneath resentment lies desire. The desire to be seen, to be secure, to be free. But shame tells the individual that longing is dangerous. So rather than acknowledge desire, they attack the mirror reflecting it. There is also a relational dimension. In close relationships, unresolved shame can make intimacy intolerable. When a partner grows, sets boundaries, or becomes more authentic, it can activate fear. Growth in one person highlights stagnation in another. Instead of celebrating the shift, the insecure partner may attempt to pull the other back into familiar patterns. Not out of malice alone, but out of fear of abandonment and inadequacy. Shame whispers that love must be earned through performance. When someone else receives love simply by being themselves, it contradicts the belief. The contradiction destabilizes the internal narrative. Envy then emerges as an attempt to restore equilibrium. If the other person is flawed, their ease must be undeserved. If their confidence is arrogance, their authenticity must be selfishness. Projection becomes common in these dynamics. The qualities the envious person criticizes are often the very qualities they have suppressed within themselves. A person who mocks vulnerability may secretly crave emotional safety. Someone who belittles ambition may fear their own unrealized potential. Someone who dismisses sensitivity may be disconnected from their own grief. Healing begins with recognizing that shame is not identity. It is an imprint formed in environments where love felt conditional or inconsistent. When shame is brought into awareness, its grip loosens. Instead of reacting defensively to another slight, a person can ask, "What does this stir in me?" That question transforms envy into information. Information can guide growth. If someone as confidence triggers discomfort, perhaps there is a disowned voice longing to be expressed. If someone as boundaries provoke irritation, perhaps there is a history of self-abandonment needing attention. Envy, when examined, becomes a map pointing toward integration. Compassion plays a crucial role, not indulgence, not justification for harmful behavior, but compassion for the wounded parts within. Acknowledging shame requires courage. It means facing early experiences of humiliation, rejection, or neglect. It means grieving the ways one adapted to survive. Without that grief, envy remains reactive. In communities and families, unresolved shame can perpetuate cycles of comparison and competition. Children absorb subtle messages about worth tied to achievement or compliance. Siblings measure themselves against each other. Partners compete for validation. Colleagues undermine instead of collaborate. The common thread is the unspoken fear of inadequacy. Breaking this cycle demands vulnerability. To admit envy without self-condemnation. To recognize that longing is human. To understand that another as brightness does not diminish one, as own capacity to shine. When shame is processed, admiration can remain admiration. It can inspire rather than threaten. Unresolved shame and envy are not signs of moral failure. They are signs of unhealed wounds. When brought into conscious awareness, they offer opportunity. The opportunity to reclaim disowned parts of the self, to transform comparison into curiosity, to replace resentment with responsibility. And in that shift, relationships deepen. Authenticity expands. The energy once spent on subtle hostility becomes available for growth. What once triggered envy becomes an invitation toward wholeness. Authenticity carries a quiet intensity that few people fully understand. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not demand attention. Yet when someone stands in their truth without performance, without excessive justification, it alters the emotional climate of any space they enter. Not because they are trying to influence others, but because truth has a resonance the nervous system recognizes immediately. Authenticity acts as a mirror. A mirror does not judge. It does not exaggerate. It simply reflects what stands before it. In the presence of someone authentic, others often encounter themselves more clearly than they expect. Their masks feel heavier. Their rehearsed responses feel hollow. Their carefully constructed identities feel unstable. The discomfort that arises is rarely about the authentic person. It is about what that presence reveals. Many people learned early in life that authenticity was unsafe. A child who expressed anger may have been shamed. A child who showed vulnerability may have been dismissed. A child who shone too brightly may have been envied or criticized. Over time, the lesson becomes internalized. Belonging requires adaptation. Love requires performance. Safety requires concealment. These adaptations become personality. The adult then navigates the world through roles: caretaker, achiever, peacemaker, rebel, rarely pausing to ask whether those roles reflect their genuine self. The performance becomes so practiced that it feels natural, until they encounter someone who is not performing. Authenticity disrupts unconscious contracts. In many relationships, there is an unspoken agreement to avoid certain truths. We will not mention the tension. We will not acknowledge the resentment. We will not question the imbalance. As long as both parties maintain the illusion, the relationship appears stable. But when one person chooses honesty about their needs, boundaries, or feelings, the illusion fractures. The mirror becomes uncomfortable, not because honesty is cruel, but because it exposes what has been tolerated. When someone says, calmly and clearly, "This does not work for me," it invites the other person to examine their own patterns. If they are ready for growth, the mirror becomes an opportunity. If they are not, it becomes a threat. Authenticity often triggers defensiveness in those who rely on external validation. When identity depends on approval, any independent expression can feel like rejection. The authentic person does not bend easily to preserve harmony. They do not distort themselves to avoid discomfort. This steadiness can be misinterpreted as arrogance or selfishness by those who equate compliance with love. Yet authenticity is not rigidity. It is alignment. Alignment between inner experience and outer expression. When thoughts, emotions, and actions cohere, the nervous system settles. There is less internal conflict, less anxiety about being discovered as inadequate, less exhaustion from maintaining appearances. That coherence generates a subtle confidence that others perceive immediately. The mirror effect intensifies in intimate relationships. Partners often unconsciously choose each other based on complementary wounds. One may suppress emotion while the other expresses it freely. One may avoid conflict while the other seeks resolution. When the expressive partner grows more grounded, the avoidant partner may feel exposed. The contrast highlights what has been avoided. Instead of asking, "What is this teaching me?" the defensive mind asks, "How can I restore the old balance?" Restoration may take the form of criticism, withdrawal, or attempts to undermine the authentic expression. If the authentic person begins setting boundaries, the other may accuse them of changing. In truth, they are simply revealing who they have always been. Authenticity also reflects possibility. When you witness someone living in alignment with their values, it awakens dormant parts within you. That awakening can feel inspiring or unsettling. Inspiring if you believe change is possible. Unsettling if you believe you are trapped in your current identity. The difference lies not in the mirror, but in the meaning assigned to the reflection. There is courage in choosing authenticity repeatedly. It requires tolerating misunderstanding. It requires surviving others' projections. It requires releasing relationships built on pretense. Many people remain inauthentic not because they lack awareness, but because they fear the consequences of truth. Yet the cost of inauthenticity accumulates quietly. Resentment builds. Fatigue deepens. The body carries tension from unspoken words. Over time, the gap between the performed self and the lived self widens, and with that widening comes anxiety and disconnection. Authenticity narrows that gap. When you speak honestly about your experience, without aggression or blame, you reclaim energy previously spent on concealment. When you decline what violates your values, you reinforce self-trust. When you admit uncertainty, you create space for genuine connection rather than curated perfection. The mirror does not demand perfection. It invites integration. Integration means acknowledging both strengths and vulnerabilities. It means recognizing shadow without collapsing into shame. It means understanding that growth is ongoing. An authentic person does not claim superiority. They claim responsibility for their inner life. For those willing to look, authenticity in another can catalyze transformation. It can prompt difficult conversations. It can dissolve superficial bonds and deepen meaningful ones. It can shift family dynamics that have remained stagnant for generations. The mirror becomes a tool for collective healing. For those unwilling to look, authenticity may continue to irritate, but irritation is information. It signals dissonance between who one is and who one pretends to be. The authentic individual is not responsible for resolving the dissonance in others. To live authentically is not to seek confrontation. It is to refuse fragmentation. It is to allow your external life to reflect your internal truth as closely as possible. That congruence carries quiet authority. And in that authority, the mirror remains steady, reflecting, revealing, inviting without ever forcing anyone to see. The fear of emotional intimacy rarely announces itself openly. It does not usually say, "I am afraid of closeness." Instead, it disguises itself as independence, high standards, busyness, logic, or even charm. On the surface, the person may appear confident and self-sufficient. Underneath, the nervous system associates closeness with danger. Emotional intimacy requires exposure. To be emotionally intimate is to allow another person to see your longings, your insecurities, your contradictions, your history. It means being known beyond roles and performances. For someone whose early experiences linked vulnerability with rejection, humiliation, or unpredictability, this exposure can feel intolerable. The body remembers what the mind rationalizes away. If a child learned that expressing sadness led to dismissal, they may grow into an adult who avoids sharing pain. If anger was met with punishment, they may disconnect from their own assertiveness. If joy was envied or criticized, they may dim their enthusiasm. Over time, self-protection becomes personality. Emotional distance becomes identity. Intimacy threatens these defenses. When someone moves closer emotionally, asking deeper questions, expressing affection, seeking mutual understanding, the protective system activates. The person may withdraw subtly. They may change the subject. They may intellectualize. They may create conflict where none existed. These behaviors are not random. They are strategies designed to restore emotional distance. Fear of intimacy is often rooted in attachment wounds. If early caregivers were inconsistent, intrusive, or emotionally unavailable, the child learned that closeness was unpredictable. Love might have arrived with control. Attention might have been conditional. Safety might have depended on compliance. The nervous system adapts by equating connection with loss of autonomy or emotional overwhelm. As adults, these individuals may crave connection deeply. The longing does not disappear. But when connection begins to feel real, anxiety surfaces. The paradox becomes painful, wanting closeness while fearing it. This internal conflict creates confusion not only within the person but within their relationships. Partners may experience mixed signals: warmth followed by coldness, openness followed by silence, promises followed by retreat. The person fearing intimacy may not fully understand their own reactions. They may blame timing, compatibility, or external stressors. Yet the underlying driver is often fear of being seen without armor. Emotional intimacy also involves mutual influence. To let someone close is to allow them to affect you. Their approval matters. Their disappointment touches you. Their absence registers. For someone who equates dependence with weakness, this interdependence feels threatening. Maintaining emotional distance preserves the illusion of control. Control feels safer than surrender. But intimacy is not about losing oneself. It is about sharing oneself. The distinction is crucial. Many who fear intimacy assume that closeness requires merging identities or sacrificing autonomy. In reality, healthy intimacy involves differentiation. Two individuals remain distinct while choosing connection. When differentiation was not modeled in early life, closeness may have felt engulfing. The fear of emotional intimacy often expresses itself through perfectionism. If I am flawless, I cannot be rejected. If I reveal no weakness, I cannot be shamed. The pursuit of perfection creates a barrier. Others may admire the competence, yet feel shut out from genuine closeness. Perfection becomes a wall disguised as achievement. Another manifestation is chronic self-reliance. I don't need anyone becomes a mantra. Independence is valuable, but when it is rigid, it signals fear. True strength allows for both autonomy and connection. Hyperindependence resists receiving support because receiving implies vulnerability. Healing this fear requires awareness rather than force. Pushing someone into vulnerability before they feel safe reinforces the threat response. Instead, safety must be cultivated gradually. Consistency, non-judgment, respect for boundaries. These experiences begin to update the nervous system expectation. For the person who recognizes this fear within themselves, self-compassion is essential. The defense is developed for a reason. They once protected a younger self from emotional harm. Criticizing those defenses only deepens shame. Instead, curiosity opens space for change. What am I afraid will happen if I share this? What does my body feel when someone gets close? Emotional intimacy grows through small acts of courage. Admitting uncertainty, expressing a need, naming disappointment without accusation, listening without preparing a defense. Each moment of authentic exchange builds tolerance for closeness. The nervous system learns that vulnerability does not automatically lead to catastrophe. It is also important to recognize that not all fear of intimacy is pathological. Sometimes withdrawal signals incompatibility or lack of trust. Discernment matters. The difference lies in pattern. If the fear arises consistently across relationships, especially when things begin to deepen, it likely reflects an internal wound rather than external circumstance. When emotional intimacy is embraced gradually, something transformative occurs. Relationships become less about performance and more about presence. Communication becomes less reactive and more reflective. The energy previously spent on maintaining distance becomes available for connection. The irony is that the very closeness feared is often what the heart most desires. Beneath the defenses lies longing for understanding, for acceptance, for shared experience. Acknowledging that longing softens resistance. It reminds the individual that fear does not define destiny. Emotional intimacy is not about exposing every thought or dissolving all boundaries. It is about allowing another human being to witness your inner world without excessive distortion. It is about trusting that being known does not automatically mean being rejected. When the fear of emotional intimacy is met with patience and awareness, it loses some of its power. The walls become doors, the armor becomes optional, and connection shifts from a perceived threat into a chosen experience rooted in mutual respect and emotional safety. That self-abandonment patterns in empaths often begin long before the word empathy ever feels like a strength. In early environments where emotional safety was uncertain, the empath learned to attune outward rather than inward. Survival depended on reading the room, anticipating needs, soothing tension, preventing conflict. Attention became externally focused. The self became secondary. This adaptation once served a purpose. A child who senses a parent, as mood shift may intervene with compliance or caretaking to restore stability. A child who notices subtle cues of disappointment may overperform to secure approval. Over time, the nervous system wires itself around vigilance and responsiveness. The message absorbed is simple. Connection requires self-suppression. As adults, empaths often carry this template into relationships. They feel responsible for others' emotions. They apologize quickly. They over-explain. They tolerate discomfort silently to avoid burdening someone else. Their capacity for understanding becomes entangled with self-erasure. Self-abandonment is not dramatic. It is quiet and incremental. It appears when you say yes while your body says no, when you dismiss your own hurt because someone else has it worse, when you rationalize repeated disappointment because you understand the other person's trauma. Understanding becomes justification. Compassion becomes accommodation. Many empaths struggle to differentiate between empathy and responsibility. Empathy means recognizing another's emotional experience. Responsibility means believing you must manage it. The shift from one to the other is subtle but significant. When responsibility replaces empathy, exhaustion follows. At the core of self-abandonment lies fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being perceived as selfish. For someone who equates love with approval, asserting needs can feel dangerous. Boundaries may trigger guilt. Disagreement may trigger anxiety. The body reacts as if survival is at stake. This reaction is rooted in early conditioning. If expressing anger once led to withdrawal of affection, anger becomes suppressed. If asking for support was met with dismissal, needs become minimized. The empath grows skilled at sensing others, but disconnected from their own internal signals. They may not even recognize hunger, fatigue, or resentment until it accumulates into burnout. Burnout is often the first wake-up call. Emotional fatigue, irritability, a quiet sense of invisibility. The empath begins to notice that despite giving so much, they feel unseen. Despite understanding everyone, they feel misunderstood. Resentment may surface, followed quickly by shame for feeling resentful at all. This internal conflict perpetuates the cycle. The empath criticizes themselves for needing reciprocity. They double down on giving, hoping effort will restore balance. But imbalance cannot be corrected by further self-sacrifice. Self-abandonment also appears in romantic relationships where the empath is drawn to emotionally unavailable partners. The dynamic feels familiar. The empath works to earn closeness, to break through walls, to heal wounds. The pursuit provides purpose. Yet in focusing on fixing another, they avoid confronting their own unmet needs. There is a subtle identity attachment to being the strong one, the understanding one, the healer. Letting go of self-abandonment means risking that identity. It means acknowledging vulnerability without packaging it as service. It means asking directly for care rather than earning it indirectly. The nervous system must learn that boundaries do not equal abandonment. When an empath says no and survives the discomfort that follows, a new pathway forms. When they express disappointment without collapsing into guilt, self-trust strengthens. These moments may feel foreign at first. Growth often does. Differentiation is essential. You can feel another as sadness without absorbing it. You can understand someone as history without excusing harmful behavior. You can offer support without becoming the sole source of regulation. Differentiation allows empathy to remain a gift rather than a liability. Self-connection must become intentional. Checking in with bodily sensations, naming emotions without judgment, identifying personal values separate from others' expectations. These practices rebuild the internal relationship that was neglected. The empath begins to notice their own signals with the same attentiveness once reserved exclusively for others. There may be grief in this process, grief for years spent overextending, grief for relationships built on imbalance, grief for the younger self who believed love required self-erasure. Allowing that grief is part of ending the pattern. As self-abandonment decreases, some relationships will shift. People accustomed to unlimited access may resist new boundaries. Accusations of change may arise. In truth, change is precisely what is happening. The empath is choosing integration over fragmentation. Integration means honoring both compassion and self-respect. It means recognizing that empathy directed inward is as vital as empathy directed outward. When the inner world receives attention, external giving becomes more sustainable. Reciprocity becomes a requirement rather than a hope. The transformation does not eliminate empathy. It refines it. It anchors it in self-awareness. The empath no longer disappears in the presence of another's need. They remain present to themselves while offering support. This dual awareness creates stability. Self-abandonment patterns dissolve gradually through repeated acts of alignment. Small boundaries, honest conversation, pauses before automatic agreement. Each aligned action reinforces the message that the self matters. And when the empath internalizes that truth, relationships begin to feel different, less draining, more mutual. Compassion flows without depletion, care is given without erasure, presence includes the self as well as the other. In that shift, empathy ceases to be a pathway to exhaustion and becomes, instead, a grounded expression of authentic connection rooted in self-trust and emotional responsibility. Healing through boundaries and awareness begins with a shift in perception. Many people associate boundaries with rejection, distance, or conflict. They imagine walls, ultimatums, and cold detachment. Yet healthy boundaries are not barriers against connection. They are structures that make safe connection possible. Without awareness, boundaries feel either impossible or aggressive. A person who has been conditioned to prioritize others' needs often struggles to recognize their own limits. They may feel discomfort, resentment, or fatigue, yet override these signals to maintain harmony. The body communicates clearly, but the mind dismisses it. Awareness is the first step in interrupting this cycle. Awareness means noticing internal experience without immediate judgment. It means observing when your chest tightens during a conversation, when your stomach drops at a request, when your energy drains after certain interactions. These sensations are not inconveniences. They are information. Information invites choice. Many patterns of overextension originate in early attachment dynamics. If loved ones depended on compliance, saying no can trigger anxiety. If belonging required caretaking, stepping back may evoke guilt. The nervous system reacts as if boundary setting threatens survival. Understanding this connection reduces self-blame. The difficulty is not weakness, it is conditioning. Boundaries are expressions of self-recognition. When you say, "This does not work for me," you are acknowledging your internal reality. You are aligning your external behavior with your internal truth. That alignment stabilizes the nervous system. It reduces the cognitive dissonance that arises when actions contradict feelings. Healing requires tolerating discomfort. The discomfort of disappointing someone, the discomfort of being misunderstood, the discomfort of not immediately fixing another person's emotional state. These moments challenge old survival strategies, yet each time you remain steady, you update the internal blueprint of safety. Awareness also reveals where boundaries are needed. Not every relationship demands distance. Not every disagreement signals violation. Discernment grows through reflection. Ask yourself, is this interaction reciprocal? Do I feel respected? Am I acting from choice or fear? Fear-driven behavior often feels urgent, immediate agreement, quick reassurance, automatic problem solving. Choice-driven behavior feels deliberate. It includes pause to refrain from self-criticism after asserting needs. Internal boundaries protect against self-abandonment. They reinforce self-trust. Many individuals worry that boundaries will damage relationships. In reality, unclear boundaries often create more harm. Resentment accumulates silently. Passive aggression replaces honesty. Emotional withdrawal substitutes for direct communication. Clear boundaries prevent these distortions. When expressed calmly and without accusation, boundaries clarify expectations. I am not available for that. I need time to think. I feel uncomfortable when this happens. These statements do not attack. They inform. They offer the other person an opportunity to respond consciously. Not everyone will respond positively. Some may resist. They may interpret your boundary as rejection because they benefited from its absence. Their reaction does not determine the validity of your limit. Healing requires distinguishing between another person as discomfort and your responsibility. Awareness also involves recognizing personal patterns. Are you drawn repeatedly to relationships where your limits are tested? Do you equate intensity with intimacy? Do you feel valued primarily when needed? Identifying these patterns shifts the focus from blaming others to understanding yourself. Self-compassion must accompany this process. You developed your coping strategies for survival. Overgiving once secured attachment. Silence once prevented escalation. Hyperindependence once shielded vulnerability. Acknowledging this history fosters gentleness rather than shame. Growth arises more sustainably from compassion than from self-criticism. As boundaries strengthen, identity may shift. You may no longer see yourself solely as the rescuer or the peacemaker. You may discover preferences and desires previously suppressed. This discovery can feel both liberating and destabilizing. Stability grows through repetition. Each aligned action reinforces awareness. Each honest conversation deepens authenticity. Each refusal to override your body as signals builds resilience. Over time, boundaries become less about defense and more about clarity. Healing through boundaries and awareness transforms relationships. Interactions become more intentional. Reciprocity becomes visible. Emotional labor becomes shared rather than assumed. You begin to notice who respects your limits without negotiation. The most profound change occurs internally. Anxiety decreases when you no longer anticipate unspoken obligations. Resentment fades when you no longer betray yourself. Energy returns when you stop carrying responsibilities that are not yours. Your nervous system settles into coherence. Boundaries do not eliminate empathy, they refine it. When you protect your capacity, your compassion becomes sustainable. When you honor your limits, your presence becomes authentic rather than obligatory. Awareness ensures that boundaries are not rigid defenses but responsive expressions of self-knowledge. Healing is not a single declaration. It is a series of conscious choices made repeatedly. To listen inward, to speak outward, to remain grounded when others react, to trust that your needs matter. Through awareness, you see clearly. Through boundaries, you act clearly. And in that clarity, healing becomes not an abstract concept but a lived experience of alignment, integrity, and emotional responsibility.